Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From beautiful Huntington Beach, California, on the HealthyLife.net network, heard in all 50 states and 135 countries, all positive talk radio. I'm Dave, the caregiver, caregiverdave.com, and usually along with my lovely co-host Adrienne Gruberg, but she could not make it today. Always a sad day when Adrienne can't make it. And we are coming to you live 24/7 on healthylife.net and afterwards on many other networks, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, etc. And in fact, we're proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM and #2 on FeedSpot out of the top 60 and #2 also on caregiver podcasts on caringvillage.com. And we have an especially exciting show for you planned today. Rayna Neises is the author of No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season. Certified coach, host of A Season of Caring podcast, and speaker who's passionate about supporting daughters and sons in a season of caring with their aging parents. I just went through that recently. And Rayna lost both her parents to Alzheimer's disease, ouch, 20 years apart. After her season of caring for her dad through her journey, she founded A Season of Caring Coaching, where she offers encouragement, support, and resources aimed at preventing family caregivers from aimlessly wandering through the important season of life, and I know what that's like. And she lives on a farm in southeast Kansas with her husband, and so I always like to say, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Anyway, before we start our interview with Rayna, I want to thank my last week's guest, Ellen Long-Stillwell. She's a registered nurse, certified hospice and palliative care. While raising 2 boys, she volunteered as part of the hospice team with the Metropolitan Jewish Health System. She's in New York, and it's a great show if you want to know all about hospice and palliative care. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews on healthylife.net. and on all the other platforms I mentioned, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, Blog Talk Radio. The list goes on and on. There's 25 of them. All right, enough of that. Rayna, welcome to the show, and we're so excited to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
I always like to ask my guests, just who is Rayna Neises, and why was she put on this earth? What's your purpose here?
You know, I love that question. And as I've listened to you, everybody's always kind of surprised by it. But I just love it because I think all of the things that we experience in life bring us to the place where we are today. And it is the reason why we're here. And, you know, at 16 years old, when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I never dreamed that I would be helping others who find themselves needing to care for their parents. But this is exactly where I'm supposed to be, in a place of just being able to serve others and encourage them in their journey of watching their parents age and eventually walking them all the way home.
Yeah, that's a tough job. I know my mother had dementia for about 10 years, and I just saw her progress. And my father probably was more fortunate. He died very quickly. He was a drinker, so he had sclerosis of the liver, and so his caregiving needs were much quicker. And I'll tell you, that's the way I want to go. Not sclerosis of the liver, but quickly. So let's talk about your caregiving experience. How did your caregiving experience and your season begin?
So this time around, it began with my dad. As I mentioned, my mom had Alzheimer's and passed away after 12 years with her disease. And 7 years later, my dad was diagnosed. So as a family, we knew what was coming, and, we had some conversations around that, and he lived for 14 years with the disease. So he was really pretty independent for quite a while. His sister was living with him and helping. But for me, that big place of having to step in and really help came whenever he reached a point where he had melanoma, had some surgery, and those daily care things just became really difficult for him. And so and his sister just maxed out. And so we were at a place where, okay, we've got to figure out what we're going to do with Dad. We need 24-hour care. What's that going to look like for our family? And so we did what most families do, went looking for memory care units and support in that way. And, you have to remember, even though my dad couldn't take care of himself daily, he actually was still playing volleyball 3 times a week. He was going to the gym and lifting weights 3 times a week. So he was 7, at that point he was, 81. And so he reached that point where he wasn't able to take care of his daily needs. It just maxed out his sister. And so as a family, we tried to figure out what are we going to do. As I looked at memory care units, it just didn't seem like a good fit for him. He was so physically active that it really brought me to tears thinking about putting him there. And so my husband just said to me, Rayna, if you need to move here and take care of your dad, then that's what you need to do. And so the farm is 220 miles from my dad's house. And so we made the commitment for me to start making that drive. And I actually was able to just stay half the week with him. And we brought in full-time care, paid caregivers. My sister spent a couple nights a week. His sister spent a couple nights a week. So we just teamed together to help keep him in his home. And we did that for 4.5 years.
Wow, what a sacrifice. What a giving gift. The gift that keeps on giving. Nothing better than a caregiver who just really steps up to the plate and does what needs to be done, I mean, none of us signed up for this. It was not on our resume, but we weren't prepared for it. I certainly wasn't. Mm-hmm. And we're just so thankful. And but looking back, I don't think I want to be that kind of a burden to my kids. So I've done things like I've gotten a long-term care policy so that, my kids would have the resources if that ever happens to me, God forbid. I joke around with them. I says, if I ever get like that, I'll show you where the guns are, make it look like an accident. But, half kidding and half not kidding.
I think it's hard, but I guess I look at it and say it was a sacrifice for our family, but I was so blessed to be able to spend that time with my dad. I mean, the memories that I have and the opportunities of things that we shared that I would never have. I mean, as an adult, you just get busy with your own life and do your own things. And so just that connection, I think that it was well worth it. And, he had long-term care insurance, but it was just part of that allowed us to bring in care versus placing him somewhere. So I think there's all kinds of options. But it is something you have to talk about together and figure out what works for your family.
And I would encourage people because, I speak to a lot of people. I got like 40,000 people on my Facebook page. And, unfortunately, the vast majority, maybe, 90% of them just have a bad attitude. They're just complaining about, I had to do this, and it's hard for them to see the joy in caregiving because it's all about attitude. They need to approach it as, hey, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They took care of you. They changed your diapers. When you were getting in trouble, they would come to your rescue. And, to hear things like, oh, well, I don't even want to go because they don't even recognize me and they don't even know if I'm there or not there. Bad attitude. And they're missing out. They're missing out.
They are missing out. I agree. Yeah.
So we're in agreement with that. What was one of the most challenging parts of caring for your dad? Because I know there were challenging parts. There certainly were challenging parts for my mom.
Definitely. And I think for me, one of the most challenging things was just that making sure that I kept my marriage alive, my relationships alive at the same time as making, my dad's care at that season of his life a priority. So the juggle, we all face that juggle, don't we? And I think really just being able to figure out how to make it where the time that I was at home on the farm, I invested in things that were important and I let go of those things for a season that weren't important. And when I was with my dad, I was able to really focus on his care and take care of him. So I think that's the hardest thing is just to be able to really, decide what's most important to you and make sure you're making decisions about your time and not just letting it kind of get pulled away from you.
Now, is this a real farm that with chickens and cows, and you have to get up before the sun and milk the cows and get your eggs from the chickens? I mean, tell me about your farm.
So thankfully, it's not an animal farm. So we farm grain. So we have, he farms both our land and then has landlords over 3,000 acres. And so we're looking at wheat, soybeans, corn, hay, that kind of stuff. So yes, lots of hard work that's going on, but not animals.
And how is life for the American farmer today?
It's challenging, honestly. I think one of the things that's most amazing to me is how much he has to know about everything. I think that's true of all small business owners, but just being able to watch all the regulations and follow the rules, and then, all the changes that are always happening. The technology is changing all the time, but it's good. It's a good life. We really are blessed and so thankful for the opportunity to work hard every day and see the rewards of that. So,
did you always live on a farm?
No, I am from Kansas City, a suburb of Kansas City, so I'm a city girl, and I met the farmer and fell in love. We got married 11 years ago, so I've been here a while now, but not my whole life, that's for sure.
So a Green Acres story, huh?
Yeah, you brought the city girl home, so.
You didn't exactly move from Times Square, but Kansas City. Well, that's interesting. How come you didn't consider bringing your dad to the farm? Was that not an option?
It was not an option because I have a sister, and so we needed to work together and be a team in that way, and she just lived a few miles from his home, and he had asked to stay in his home, and with dementia, an environmental change is not always the best thing, so we just made that compromise together. So
how was your sister doing? I mean, did she get to the point of burnout and you came to the rescue like the cavalry?
I think we just teamed pretty well together. She definitely had to take care of the finances well before I was doing all the traveling and doctor's appointments. That was kind of on the horizon as things were getting more and more difficult for him. But I think we did pretty well at preventing burnout for each other by being that team and just having those conversations of how are you? What do you need? Who do we need to bring on the team? What other support do we need? I was big about making sure that we had those check-ins regularly. So she carried a lot of the burden in a different way. She didn't do as much of the hands-on there, but she was always on call. And you know how that is. That's hard. Yeah.
How long before you first noticed the symptoms of his dementia or Alzheimer's?
Yeah, it's sad whenever I think of that. We actually, because we had lost my mom and she was only 65 when she passed away, he made a phone call to me probably 5-6 years after she was gone. And Dad and I were in business together. We owned a Sylvan Learning Center, and I lived about 4 hours away where I ran Sylvan. Oh, yeah. And so we owned that business together, and he made a phone call to me and said, Rayna, I'm really worried. And I'm like, what's up, Dad? And he's like, I think something's wrong with me. And I'm like, well, why? And he said, I just am not remembering things. And I was like, oh, Dad, don't worry about it. I think, we haven't seen normal aging. His parents died really young. My mom's parents died really young. I said, oh, just go to the doctor. It'll be fine. And then it wasn't. He had mild cognitive impairment was that first diagnosis. And so it was disconcerting. I don't think I saw it as much, but then as we were working together and having those business meetings and talking over the budget, Dad was an accountant before he retired to take care of my mom. And so he and I would talk through the books and, talk about those just business decisions. And that's when I saw the processing was changing, his difficulty being able to take it all in and give me the same kind of recommendations that we used to have. So I would say those were kind of the first signs. And then, of course, his sister was living with him. And so she was able to keep us in tune with when we were concerned, what things were happening, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. Did he know you up until the end, or did that change?
No, I'm sure he didn't. There was always a heart connection. So he definitely knew that I was someone special. But if you ask him if he was married or if he had children, depending on the day and the time, most of the time the answer was no. Occasionally we would get a yes. But, one of the things that I'm so thankful for at the end, within the last days of his life, he actually said my name again. And I was trying to think back. It was probably years since I had heard my name, and he was in his bed,
special.
and I had been standing there talking to him, and someone else came in the room, and I kind of went to the head of his bed where he couldn't see me, and he looked around, where did Rayna go? And it was just like, oh, wow. He knew, so what a blessing that is to have that memory. But
that is a blessing.
It's hard, when your parents forget who you are, there's no way not to be hurt by that.
Yeah. So, are there certain kinds of things that you would do that would, especially toward the end when the cognitive impairment was at its worst? I know with my mom, I used to put on headphones for 40s music, and she would just come alive, and we would sing songs together or put pictures up on the wall. What are some things that really helped?
So both of my parents, really, their progression, their disease was very different. My mom was similar to what you said. My mom actually was nonverbal for 8 years of her journey. So she talked gibberish or didn't, would just smile at you. But when she heard music, she could sing, and she always clapped her hands and really enjoyed that a lot. She loved physical touch, that kind of thing, just sitting and being with her. She was more of a homebody, more of a quiet, introverted type personality. My dad was an extrovert, and my dad he played professional baseball. He was a people person. And so he was just physically active, literally as active as we could keep him. So we stopped going to the gym probably about 2 years before he passed away, but we did add a ping pong table to our house, and he loved to play ping pong, and he was so good at it. Within a month of his passing, we were still playing ping pong together. He was ornery, and he laughed, and how long we played definitely got shorter as he struggled a little bit, but overall that was just one of my favorite things too, was just being able to play ping pong with him.
So creative to look for things like that. I never would have thought of that. But yeah, he
loved to do things. He loved to do things and be active, and so it was like, what can we do inside that doesn't take a lot of, it's not softball anymore. We can't play volleyball or softball, and those were his favorites. So we had to find something we could do. And so, we definitely enjoyed puzzles. He loved to look at coffee table books of Babe Ruth and those old ball players and just kind of tell stories about things. And so those were the quiet things that we did, but keeping him physically engaged was a big piece of who he was. So it was important to figure that out.
All right, well, listen, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back, so don't go away.
One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships, is about Charlene, a stroke survivor. Back in 1996, Charlene was a healthy, normal, very active 52-year-old woman whose amazing talents resembled that of both a Martha Stewart and a Wonder Woman. But all that changed when she suffered a massive stroke that left her severely speech impaired and paralyzed on the right side. Who am I? My name is David. I've had the privilege of being Charlene's husband since 1975. We had a wonderful fairy tale storybook-like courtship that culminated in our marriage a year later. Charlene had just come out of a marriage where after 10 years, she received 2 black eyes and a broken nose by her former husband when he came home high on speed. Charlene believed in no second chances of any kind for abuse, so she left. Finding herself all alone in the world with her 5 and 10-year-old daughters, Cynthia Lorraine and Deborah Lynn, she started raising them by herself for the next 2 years. Then fate brought us all together. After falling in love with Charlene, Cindy, and Debbie, our love then produced Rebecca Elizabeth. We had a wonderful, normal life for the next 20 years. But today, things are very different for everyone. How about the reaction of 9-time Grammy and Dove Award recipient, the godfather of contemporary gospel Christian music, Andre Crouch? Charlene just won't let the promises of God go, and she has not let her circumstances get in the way of her faith. She's not just a survivor, she's more than a conqueror, as the Bible states. You'll be encouraged by her testimony, regardless of what you're going through. Available everywhere.
And we're back on the Caregiver Dave Show. I'm Dave Insani at caregiverdave.com, and our guest, Rayna Neises. And we're talking about her book and her dad and her mom and the experiences that she went through. When you lost your mom, because that happened first, right? Was your dad involved in the caregiving, and how did that work out? And was he patient? Did he take it really hard when she finally passed? How long was that process?
So Mom was 53 when she was diagnosed, so that changed their whole plan for retirement. She was a stay-at-home mom and cared for us. I was only 16, so we were still in the thick of high school, and my sister was off to college, but it was definitely a shock to our whole family, and it was difficult. It was a 12-year journey for her, and honestly, I went off to college, and my second year of college, my dad realized my mom couldn't be home alone anymore, and so he actually took early retirement from his job as the chief financial officer at Folgers Coffee plant in Kansas City, and stayed home with her. And his goal was to travel as much as they could and live some of those dreams that they had. But, it's kind of short-lived with the disease. And so her progression and her personality, she was such a homebody that it was hard for her to be away from home. And so they did some traveling, but it really didn't last very long. And he got to a point where he did allow some paid caregivers to come in. It was only during the day. He did all the bathing and caring for her. I would come home and take over as much as I could on spring break and summers. I was a teacher, and so I continued to do that even after college to be able to give as much support as I could. But he really was her primary caregiver. And so, his personality, he learned to cook, he learned to chill out. Honestly, he wouldn't have been the most patient probably earlier in his life, but he just adored her, and he really did an amazing job of caring for her. I wish he had let more people help because, I know it was really hard on him to watch her go. And as you ask, he did not take her passing well. It was very difficult. And honestly, I think up until the point in which he forgot her, if you said my mom's name, my mom was Freddie, and if you said Freddie, anything about Freddie, tears came to his eyes. He just missed her a lot. So it was a precious, sweet relationship. Yeah, it really was, until he got to a point that he would say he wasn't married. He didn't recognize her. So, and there seemed to be a little more peace at that point of missing her, once he forgot. But
well, they're together now, aren't they?
They are, and that was one of the most comforting things once he passed, was just knowing that after 20 years apart, that they would get to be together again.
So did he exhibit some signs of burnout, for doing too much himself, etc.?
I wish I could tell you I knew. I don't think I paid enough attention. I was in my 20s, and, I was actually lived away from home. Yeah, I lived away from home for a while in Texas, and so I don't think I saw it as much as I should have. Once I was home again at the end of her life, the last couple of years I was there, and I would do more. He played softball, and so I would come and stay with her at the house while he played. So he did ask for help in some things, but emotionally I know that it was just a difficult journey.
Yeah. So much similarities between us two. My wife had a stroke at 52, which is pretty young. I was 42. She was a little older than me. And our daughter was like 18. And it affected her, because, well, that's a whole nother story. But we're interviewing you today. But your emotions. Let's talk about emotions. How did they impact you in your caregiving season and things that you had to do?
I think emotions are the biggest part, especially in this kind of process where your parents forgetting you and they're not able to do things. But I think all of us struggle in watching our parents age. They've been our whole lives the capable, competent one who takes care of us, right? And even if they aren't doing everything for us, they're always there. They're a phone call away. So I think just watching them get to a point where they need help is so difficult. So I really encourage people as I work with them as a coach and just as I talk to people, you've got to realize there's a lot of emotion behind this. And if you ignore it, that's when you're going to get yourself in trouble. You've got to process through it. I think reflection is one of the most important things you can do. Slow down, be quiet. If you're a journaler, journal. If you're not, do what it is you need to do to really think through where your feelings are coming from, where your reactions and behaviors are coming from, because they're rooted in those feelings. So for me, as I drove home that 220 miles every week, I just kind of asked myself some questions. What went well? What didn't go well? How am I? What do I need? And sometimes I just needed to cry. Sometimes I needed to make a lunch date with a friend that I call my fun friends and, get some laughter back into my life. But I think really just realizing the emotions are so important. It's really something you have to take care of.
Yeah, you don't have this CARE formula, CARE, communicate with your friends, don't isolate them, don't rag on them, save that for a support group. Did you have a support group, and did you have those special friends that you maintained the relationships, didn't burn them out, and they didn't stop coming by and all that stuff?
I definitely had friends that I kept in my inner circle and those that I knew that I needed to spend time with. And so that was part of that intentionality, is get them on the calendar. I'm going to be home on Tuesday night. Let's go to dinner, or let's go to a movie, that kind of thing. I did not engage in a support group. I think I was going through coach training at the time. I had friends that I had a lot of coaching. So I used a coach rather than a support group necessarily. But I definitely am a huge supporter of support groups, because I think finding others who understand to the level of what you're going through really can help. Yeah. And like you said, keeping those friends and not dumping all the time definitely can help.
You did have a support group. It was a support group of one.
True.
And having a support group of one is better than having a support group of zero.
Definitely.
Do you ever, I know I think about this all the time, because my memory, I'm 67, and I certainly don't have the memory I used to have, and my mother had dementia, so I am worried that, maybe the same thing will happen to me. So I saw this ad in Facebook about 5 years ago. We're doing a dementia study. Come and see. We're trying to find early warning signs and this and that. So I've been, every 6 months, I go take the test, and so far so good. I mean, I'm not doing great, but I haven't crossed that magic line of, mm-hmm. Do you worry about that?
I think I would be lying if I told you I never think about it. I try not to think about it a lot. Like we talked about before, that positive side of life, you have to kind of focus with what you can control. And some of these things are outside of our control. But, right. I guess I'm definitely active in the Alzheimer's Association, very supportive of all of the trials and things that they're doing, research to get somewhere with this disease, because sadly enough, it's been 16 years since we've had a new medication approved for Alzheimer's. So it's crazy that we're just running into so many roadblocks, but the research is really showing a lot of trending to getting to some good breakthroughs here soon. So I'm praying for that. But I guess that would be the true answer is I have the faith that the Lord knows, and worrying's not going to change it. And so I'm just going to trust him, and what will be, will be. So we have long-term care insurance. I'm good to my husband so that he'll be good to me. I'm just going from there.
And your kids too?
Yeah.
Got to be good to our kids. Hey, yes. We're going to take another break. We'll be right back.
We are a community of caregivers that understands and supports you wherever you are in your journey. We are a place to connect with other caregivers, but more importantly, a place to get practical, actionable help. There are lots of ways for you to get support. First of all, you can download our welcome pack. This will get you started on your Thrive journey. Next, you can ask and get answers to your questions by posting them here in our private Facebook groups. You can also get live online support by attending one of our live weekly Connect webinars. You can get practical, actionable advice by listening to our weekly podcast. You can hear and read other stories about other caregivers' experiences. Plus, add your own in our weekly Share Your Story forum, posted every Tuesday in the Facebook group.
you can access essential resources and download practical Thrive Solutions Packs, all of which are geared to help you thrive as a caregiver. You get lifetime access to all of our resources. Again, we're here to support you and to help you thrive and to enjoy your life as a caregiver. And remember, this is a place to get hope, not just cope. And we're back again on the Caregiver Dave Show. I'm Caregiver Dave, caregiverdave.com, and I'm my guest, Rayna Neises. And we're talking about dementia, Alzheimer's, caring for our loved ones. Self-care is so important, and that's probably the thing that we learn the last after we burn out. What was your experience with burnout and learning how to care for yourself, put your oxygen mask on first, etc.?
For me, I think because I was going through coach training and I had become a life coach, I was understanding myself and my awareness so much better even before I got to that point. And so that reflective time that I had, those checking in with my friends that were coaches and having regular coaching sessions, I prevented myself from getting to that total burnout stage. There were definitely times that things were harder, but I really made it a point to, when I reached those times, we had a season where my dad was up 3 or 4 times a night. And so as I was there 3 nights in a row, and I am a girl who needs 8 hours of rest every night, then I found myself at a place where I looked at my sister and said, I need some more rest. So can we bring a caregiver in to stay longer on Saturday than they were so I can sleep a little bit more? So I just really advocated for myself, probably exceptionally well compared to what most people do. And I think part of that was just, again, the friends that I had around me and that training that I had to really be reflective and to stop and think about it. But self-care is so important, and it is difficult. It is hard to know what you need unless you really stop and ask yourself the questions.
Yeah. I see you have a dog in the background. Was the dog beneficial and therapeutic for your dad? Was he there as well?
We had multiple dogs. Well, my dad had a dog, and so he was there through most of the journey. I guess we lost him about 2 years before my dad passed away. But I always brought my dogs with me because my dad loved the dogs, and they were a great comfort to him, and then as well as to me. Because, when you're taking care of somebody with Alzheimer's, you don't have necessarily normal conversations. And so I talk to my dogs as if they're my little people. Sure. And so I had lots of normal conversations with them. And so, yes, dogs, I agree. Yeah. They're definitely part of my self-care. Yeah.
So fortunately, you were a coach and you were taking your own advice, which is, unusual because a lot of coaches and experts don't take their own advice. The shoemaker who needs shoes, the marriage counselor who's getting a divorce, etc. Why were you involved in coaching? Was it, before the dementia, the Alzheimer's thing, or was it because of it?
That's a great question. So I had mentioned earlier, my dad and I owned a Sylvan Learning Center. When I married the farmer, my business was 90 miles from the farm. And so we continued to run my business for a while, but eventually it just got to a point where it didn't make sense. And so when we made that change from me leaving Sylvan to come to the farm full time, I was kind of at that point, what am I going to do with my life? And so I was looking for options, and I found coaching at that point. And I just loved it because of my experience with Sylvan, of being able to work with families, both the parents and the child. It was so rewarding. And so that's what I found coaching to be as well, is that opportunity to really just listen and help problem solve with the person. And so that was my step into that. But, it lined up perfectly because I was in training. I was able to start my coaching business, and it's portable. And so being at the farm or being at Dad's house, it didn't make a difference. Yeah. I could still work with my clients. So it was perfect for me.
That's great. What type of classes did you do at Sylvan? Was it just everything? Yes.
Worked with kindergarten through adults on reading, writing, math, study skills, ACT prep, all of those things.
Yeah. Yep. You were practically a coach, and you were involved in the teaching process too, as opposed to just hiring people and having to do it.
Right. Yeah. My college is teaching. I have a reading certification. And so I've spent years in the classroom as well before I found Sylvan. I just love the personal touch of Sylvan and that opportunity to really zone in on the problem and help solve it.
Mm. So did your dad ever need to be transferred from his home to a facility, or he didn't have to do that?
So we actually were able to keep him home all the way to the end. He suffered arterial clot. And so he had a blood clot, so we had to go through surgery, had a little rehab from that. But then after we moved from rehab, we went back home, and that's where he passed away.
What a good daughter you are, you and your sister. That's how I want. Just stay in the home. There's no place like home, as Dorothy said.
Very true.
How do you recommend someone work through their emotions, getting back to emotions?
You've got to have those people. I think support group is a great place to do that. Definitely, if you can hire a coach, I do think they will help you do that as well. But I think it's so important to really be aware of all the different emotions. With my book, I have a pre-order bonus that is a workbook that looks at 21 different emotions you might be experiencing in your caregiving season with some questions to kind of think through. So that might be something that your listeners might be interested in. It's at noregrets-book.com. If you pre-order the book, then you can get that download free.
That's great. You did tell me that you are a proponent of support, even though you kind of only had a coach. What is the benefit of support? I mean, a lot of people, back in the olden days when I was needing support, they didn't have, the internet and all of the things they have today. But man, there's so many support groups online and on Facebook, etc. What is the real benefit of having a group of people surrounding you, sharing stories, understanding that, hey, what you're going through is no problem. I've been through that, and here's what I did. Try this. What's the dynamic going on in a support group?
So I have the privilege of leading a couple of different kinds of support groups. One of them is faith-based, and I adore that faith-based group because we can come together in faith and know that there is hope, even in the midst of all of this yuck, because of the hope that we have in our faith. So I think we get that support through that piece of it, but also just hearing others that are making it through. And honestly, I love to hear within my support group, when someone is struggling with something, everyone else is coming back and saying, hey, we see you. We know what you're doing. You are doing enough. And don't be hard on yourself. I mean, sometimes you just need someone else to say that to you because you don't ever feel like you're doing enough.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that what you're going through is normal. I mean, even the grief process, I didn't know what that was. And when someone told me I was grieving, I looked it up, and there's 5 stages, etc. Well, listen, we're going to take another break. These darn breaks. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Dave Nasani, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too, Thrive and Stay Alive as a Caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver. On sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com.
And we're back on the Caregiver Dave Show with my guest, Rayna Neises. And I want to talk a little bit about your book during this last stretch in our interview. Go ahead. Why did you write it? What are your goals? And what do you hope to accomplish through all of that?
So I never imagined I would be a writer. I like to talk way more than I like to write. And so at my dad's funeral, actually, my dad was able to attend a day stay program for people with Alzheimer's or memory impairment. And the director came to my sister and I and just was like, we just loved your dad. We're going to miss him so much. And she gave me a big hug and she said, you and your sister need to write a book. I was like, oh, whatever. And so I just kind of ignored it and went on my merry way. And I had a friend who was going through some struggles with her parents. She's like, you just need to write a book. You've learned so much through this season with your dad. And so as I looked at that, I thought, okay, so what have I learned? And just sat down and put paper to pencil. And I worked with some great coaches that helped me to get the message out. But the book is, first 10 chapters are just things that I learned: how to hire and fire help, how to manage medication, how to honor the person that you're caring for, how to do it without giving up your whole life. The last 6 chapters are self-care things. We push self-care as people who are caregiver survivors, and we just keep telling people to take care of themselves and take care of themselves. But I really wanted to give you some things that I think really helped me and impacted me in that. And one of those was writing a personal manifesto, really sitting down paper and pencil and saying, who am I? What's important to me? And then using that to make decisions based off of my manifesto. So, but because I'm a daughter who loves her parent and wants to be able to support him, I can't say yes to everything else. And I think that was one piece that really helped me to stay healthy throughout the caregiving season for me as well. So my goal for the book is just to share our journey. It has lots of personal stories of challenges that I faced and ways that I overcame it, and how we worked as a team to do that as a family.
Wow, that's great. Let me back up to emotions again, because, what are your options? Be logical or be emotional, And I always say that you don't want to ignore your emotions. You don't want to ignore the logical side of your brain. I say many caregiver decisions are like 50-50. Oh my God, what do I do if I do this? That's going to happen if I do that, and you flip a coin or whatever. But I say, if you're at that point, give your logic 51% voting rights and your emotions 49. And that way, when you come to that tie, the logic side of your brain will have that veto power. Do you agree with that? And can you think of some examples where you were kind of going through the same thing?
I do agree with that. And in coaching, we talk about the dissonance, the uncomfortable, the frustration that is actually when our head and our heart are in disagreement. And so in our heads, we know one thing, but our heart feels something differently. And we kind of have to get to a point where we can get them on the same page in order to find peace. And so sometimes it is our logic helping our heart to see things a little bit differently. Sometimes it's our heart just feeling the emotion, right, and then getting that out of the way. But I agree. I think that's part of the intentionality that I teach within my book of your caregiving season. If you're not intentional, which is your logical side, you're going to have regrets. Because if you make all of your decisions from the heart base only, you're going to look back and wish that you had noticed more options. And I think our logical side gives us all the different options that we need. And that's what really helps us to make decisions we don't regret later.
Yeah, because there are logical people out there who are used to making logical decisions, and the opposite, people who are used to making emotional decisions. Unfortunately, it seems like most people who are on the emotional side have more problems than those who are on the logical side, and those who are on the logical side seem to have problems with relationships. And so, exactly, they're both important, and you should both value them, but give a tiny little edge to the logic, I have found at least.
Well, and I think sometimes if we ride through the emotion, we can allow the logic to be more our deciding factor. We have to ride through the emotion, not ignore it. But we need to realize that once that high emotion's over, we're going to be more likely to make a good decision on the logical side.
And again, caregiving is a temporary thing most of the time. And even long-term caregiving is temporary, because there's going to come a day where you're not a caregiver anymore. And some people actually go through depression. Their whole identity was wrapped up in caregiving. They say, oh my God, what do I do now? And what do you say to the person who is going through that, but also what do you say to the person who is waiting and they hear people like you say, oh, it's a joyful experience, and they're not experiencing the joy, and they want to experience the joy, but it's just not there. It's just a job, and they love their loved one, but they wish they weren't a caregiver. They wish they didn't have to do this. They wish their loved one wasn't in this condition, and sometimes they just kind of wish they would die. Put them out of their misery, because they are miserable, and themselves are miserable. What do you say to those people who are really, really struggling and want to see the joy, but just can't see it?
I think the key is that you have to want to see it, and it is a process of training your brain to see the moments. When we're overwhelmed and we're just stuck in all the to-dos and we're not realizing that right here in the moment, the person that I love for is right here looking at me, and I can interact with them and I can receive that love back, then that is what we're missing. And so it is difficult, and there definitely is no way of saying that it's not hard, but it's a matter of learning to be in the moment with that person. Find a smile, challenge yourself to find a smile for them to get them to laugh or to smile back with you. Find a way to make that moment the best moment. I don't like to compare parenting your parents, because you're not parenting your parent. They're still an adult. But, you can do the same thing. You can fall into the same trap as a parent. You can be so worried about getting your kid to school on time and with clothes on and all of those things that you miss the fun moments. And so it really is a process of learning to train yourself to find the fun moments and find the joy in the moment. It's there. It might just be something you have to dig around for. If you can't find it, get some help, both with the caregiving tasks that are the most burdensome for you and with your emotions, whether that be a counselor or a coach or support group. Get some help, because this is a season. You will walk them all the way home, and your choices will dictate whether or not you have a life to walk back into that you love, or if you lost everything because you've given it all up just for this season.
Yeah, that role reversal with parent and child is so depressing sometimes, where you all of a sudden are the parent and they are the child, and you have to keep their respect and self-dignity and all that. So in the last 30 seconds, what is the last one thing that you would offer to others in the middle or beginning of caring for a loved one?
I think it comes back to being intentional and being reflective. The two most important things you can do. Go into the season with intention. Don't step in and do it all. Step in and find the help, give them the help that they need, but that doesn't mean it has to be you. And take time to reflect in the middle of the season and know whether or not you're doing right by you and by them. And you can only do that by taking those self-inventories. So you have to be reflective.
Great answer. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I think you helped a lot of people. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Or if they want to buy your book?
So you can find out more about the book at noregrets-book.com, and you can contact me at aseasonofcaring.com. I would love to be able to have a conversation, see if we can support you in your journey or help you find the support that you need.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and everybody, we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Bye-bye.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.